You don't need a mansion or a Hollywood name to leave behind a story that's more than just fame.
Me to need a will, just a family, or a cat plotting world domination. Welcome to Celebrity Estate Chaos, where we prove a lot of things. Like how estate chaos isn't just for millionaires with private islands, anyone with stuff, relatives, or that one weird collection you think nobody's fighting over. And chances are, they will.
Okay, it really feels like the ground has been reminding us who's in charge lately. You know? With serious shaking in Japan, Alaska, California, and those aftershocks still hitting Turkey. It's just a stark global reminder. Earthquakes can happen basically anywhere, anytime. And the danger, well, it often doesn't stop when the shaking does.
Exactly.
And that really got us thinking, like right now where you're sitting, if things started to rumble, would you really know what to do? Beyond maybe, standing in a doorway, which, spoiler alert, we hear is maybe not the best move anymore.
You've really hit on something key there, something from the sources we've been digging into. That feeling, being caught totally off guard, hoping you remember some half-heard advice.
Right.
That's pretty much the opposite of being prepared. And that's kind of the space this deep dive wants to help move us out of.
Precisely. It's what one of our sources actually calls oops-proofing your life.
Oops-proofing. I like that.
Yeah. And it's not just for these huge natural disasters, but, any of those moments where something unexpected happens and you just think, oops, now what? I really, really wish I'd thought about this yesterday.
It's about building that resilience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Having the knowledge, the tools to navigate those unpredictable moments with, more confidence than panic.
And that is absolutely our mission today. We've gone through this whole stack of sources, articles, research, real-world stories, including these really practical handbooks from Tina Jin.
Yeah, those are great.
To pull out the most crucial stuff. We're here to kind of cut through the noise, maybe debunk a few myths, uncover some surprising insights, and basically help you build a plan that moves you from that uh-oh feeling to more of an, okay, I think I've got this, whether it's Mother Nature or just, life-throwing curveballs.
And a core problem that came up again and again in these materials is simply that uh-oh is not a strategy. Feeling overwhelmed, that's common. But the goal is to shift that feeling by actually taking concrete steps.
Right. And we've got a lot to cover to build that sort of comprehensive, oops-proof mindset. We'll definitely get into the tangible things like supplies and physical prep.
Sure.
But also those less obvious, but just as vital aspects like communication, mental and emotional readiness, connecting with your community, securing your digital life, and really importantly, something often overlooked, preparing for all the animals in your life. From the tiniest hamster right up to livestock.
It's a big scope.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start with the most immediate concern during an actual earthquake, just staying safe while the shaking is happening.
Okay.
These recent events, like that powerful quake in Japan, tremors in California, they remind us that even places we think of as having advanced building codes can still see significant impacts.
Yeah.
It really challenges that idea that, your location alone dictates how ready you need to be. Individual action is just paramount.
That's a really powerful point. It's so easy to feel like, oh, that happens elsewhere. But the sources consistently bring it back to personal responsibility. And okay, so when the shaking starts, what is the most effective technique? What's emphasized across the board?
It's that classic phrase, drop, cover, and hold on.
Drop, cover, hold on. Okay.
It sounds basic, I know, but the key is really in the execution. You drop to your hands and knees. That stops you from being thrown over by the shaking.
Okay.
Then you take cover immediately under something sturdy, like a solid desk or table. Not in a doorway. That's the outdated advice you hinted at.
Wait, hang on. Why not a doorway? I swear that's what I always heard.
It was, yeah. But that was mainly for much older, like Adobe-style buildings, where the doorway frame might have actually been reinforced. In most modern construction, doorways are often no stronger than any other part of the house. And crucially, they offer zero protection from falling objects or, potentially, collapsing walls.
Okay.
The real danger inside most homes isn't the frame collapsing on you. It's being hit by things falling textures. Bookshelves, stuff on shelves, decor, even parts of the ceiling.
Ah, okay. So getting under a sturdy table actually shields you from that falling debris, which a doorway just doesn't do.
Exactly.
Makes total sense. One of the handbooks described it like a turtle pulling into its shell.
That's a great visual. Yeah. Making yourself small, protecting your head, your neck, your vital organs, that's the goal. And you hold on to whatever you're under.
Right, hold on. Why?
Because the shaking can be violent enough to literally slide heavy furniture across the room. Holding on keeps your cover with you.
Got it. Okay, so forget the doorway myth. We're going full turtle mode under something solid. Now, shaking stops. Are we good? Can we just stand up and look around?
Not quite yet, according to the sources. One of the biggest dangers after the main quake is aftershocks. These can hit minutes, hours, even days later. And sometimes they can be nearly as strong as the initial quake, causing more damage to structures that are already weakened.
That's such a critical insight. The danger isn't actually over when the first shaking starts. You got to stay alert.
Precisely. And this is exactly where having essential supplies ready before anything happens becomes, well, non-negotiable.
Okay.
Think of it as your bridge.
Yeah.
You know, for those first few hours or days before, maybe help can arrive or conditions stabilize a bit.
Okay, confession time. My idea of an emergency kit is probably pretty pathetic. What do the sources recommend as the absolute minimum for a real kit?
Well, they consistently stress being self-sufficient for at least 72 hours, 3 days.
72 hours, okay.
So we're talking food, non-perishable stuff, water, and this is key, at least a gallon of water per person per day.
A gallon per person per day? Wow.
Yeah. A comprehensive first aid kit, obviously, a multi-tool or at least some basic tools,
Yeah.
including things like a wrench or pliers, specifically to potentially turn off utilities like gas or water if needed.
A wrench? Huh, that feels specific. Why include that?
Well, think about it. If there's a potential gas leak after the shaking, knowing how and having the tool to turn off the main gas line could literally prevent an explosion or a fire.
Oh, wow, okay.
Same idea. For a ruptured water pipe, stopping it quickly can mitigate a ton of damage.
Yeah.
So yeah, small tools, but potentially huge impact.
Right.
The sources also mentioned something really simple, a whistle. Just a basic whistle to signal for help if, heaven forbid, you were trapped.
Whistle, wrench. Okay, adding those to my mental list.
Yeah.
It definitely starts feeling less like, doomsday prepping and more like practical adulting.
That's exactly the mindset shift the sources encourage. It's proactive preparation, not living in constant fear.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of supplies, one kind of surprising point that came up was challenging that standard 72-hour number.
Oh, how so?
Well, one source made a pretty compelling argument that whatever you think you need for 72 hours, maybe you should double it.
Double it? Really? Why?
The reasoning makes sense when you hear it. First, past events, even minor ones, show that scarcity drives panic buying. Shelves clear out way faster than you'd expect.
Oh, yeah.
Remember the toilet paper shortages during the early pandemic?
Oh, gosh, yes. Don't remind me.
Right. That was just a tiny taste of that psychological effect. And second, we tend to really underestimate the duration of disruptions, and especially the cascading effects.
Cascading effects, like a ripple effect.
A power outage isn't just the lights being out. It affects water pumps, gas station pumps, cell towers, ATMs, store payment systems, everything. So what starts as maybe a projected 3-day issue can easily stretch much longer. Doubling your supplies just gives you a much safer buffer.
That makes a disturbing amount of sense. It's not just the earthquake, it's everything that follows. Okay, what about things like essential medications? I'm guilty of only getting refills when I'm down to the last few pills.
Yeah, this is flagged consistently as a critical area. Sources strongly recommend trying to keep at least a 1-month supply of essential prescriptions on hand if that's feasible with your insurance and doctor.
Whole month. Wow.
Think about it. Supply chains can be completely severed. Pharmacies might be damaged, inaccessible, or just overwhelmed. Needing critical medication during a crisis and not having it, that's an uh-oh moment you absolutely want to avoid.
Wow. I honestly just assumed pharmacies would kind of always be there somehow. That's a real wake-up call.
Yeah, the real-life stories from past disasters. People struggling immensely when they couldn't get vital prescriptions. It's definitely something to factor into your planning.
Okay, so doubling supplies, stocking up on meds. What else are the sources highlighting? What potential pitfalls are we maybe not thinking about?
Okay, here's one that feels almost counterintuitive in our super digital age. Physical cash.
Cash. But I've got my phone wallet, tap to pay, everything's digital.
Exactly. That's precisely the point. What happens when the power grid is down for an extended period? Or cell towers are out?
Oh.
APMs won't work. Card readers at stores won't function. All that money sitting conveniently in your bank account, suddenly inaccessible.
Oh, right. Wow. I genuinely almost never carry cash anymore.
And that's totally normal for everyday life now. But emergencies really expose how fragile those digital systems can be. Having some physical cash, especially in smaller denominations, could be absolutely essential for buying gas if any stations are operational, or food, or other necessities if electronic payments are just impossible.
Huh. It's like an analog insurance policy for a digital world.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, cash added to the list. So we've covered supplies, meds, cash. What about making our homes more resilient before anything even happens?
Yes, that's a huge part of physical preparedness, especially if you live in an earthquake-prone area. But honestly, it's good practice anywhere. It's about proactively looking around your living space, identifying potential hazards, and mitigating them. Think of it like giving your home an oops-proofing checkup.
Like, okay, I have this massive, heavy mirror over the fireplace that, frankly, makes me slightly nervous even on a normal day.
Precisely. That's exactly the kind of thing. Heavy objects that could fall during shaking are major hazards. Tall bookcases, big TVs not secured, large artwork, those heavy mirrors.
Yeah.
The handbooks strongly recommend securing these items to wall studs using sturdy straps or brackets. It seems like a small thing, but it keeps them from toppling over and becoming dangerous projectiles.
Okay, noted. Tackling that mirror is officially on my to-do list. What else should I be looking for during this checkup?
Your water heater is another big one. In many places it's required now, but make sure it's properly strapped to the wall studs, usually with 2 straps.
Why the water heater specifically?
A heavy water heater that tips over can rupture gas lines or water lines. It's not just a mess of 40 or 50 gallons of water flooding the place, it's a potential fire hazard, and it leaves you without hot water, which, trust me, is a surprisingly important comfort in a crisis.
Good point. Okay.
Also check things like upper kitchen cabinets. Are they securely latched? You don't want all your dishes and glassware flying out during shaking.
Right. It's about making your immediate surroundings safer during the actual event. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Moving from the physical prep to something maybe less tangible, but incredibly important. How do the sources address the mental and emotional toll of disasters?
Oh, this is critical. It's an area the sources really emphasize goes hand in hand with all the physical preparedness stuff. Earthquakes, major storms, any crisis.
Yeah.
They are inherently traumatic events.
Yeah.
It's not just about surviving the physical event. It's about coping with the stress, the anxiety, the potential trauma afterward.
So how do we even begin to prepare ourselves internally for something that can feel so overwhelming and, well, unpredictable?
One theme that comes up repeatedly is acknowledging the reality of stress and fear before it happens. It's okay to be scared. It's normal. The sources suggest that simply talking about potential scenarios, maybe sharing your fears with trusted friends or family, just having open conversation can actually normalize these feelings. It makes them less debilitating if and when a crisis actually hits. Trying to avoid the topic can paradoxically make the fear worse.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a tendency to avoid those difficult conversations, isn't there? Especially maybe with kids. But you're saying facing it in a controlled way actually helps.
Exactly. It reduces the power of the unknown and fosters a sense of shared experience, shared coping. The sources also really encourage developing coping mechanisms beforehand.
Like what kind of things?
Simple things, really. Practicing mindfulness or deep breathing exercises now, so they're familiar. Having a mental or even written list of activities that genuinely help you relax, reading, listening to music, maybe spending time in nature if possible. And crucially, knowing who you can reliably turn to for emotional support.
It sounds like building a kind of psychological first aid kit.
That's a perfect analogy. Building that resilience muscle. Just like we practice drop, cover, and hold on for physical safety, we can practice these mental tools to help us stay calmer, think clearer under pressure.
Cool.
And this proactive approach, thinking about support systems, ties really nicely into the broader idea that you're not alone in this.
Right, which brings us squarely to the importance of community preparedness. Why is connecting with our neighbors flagged as so incredibly vital in these sources?
Because the reality, in almost any large-scale disaster, is that professional first responders, fire, police, paramedics, will be completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
Roads might be impassable, communication lines down.
Yeah.
For those first crucial hours, maybe even days, your most important resource, your most immediate support system, it's likely going to be your immediate neighbors.
That's actually a really humbling reminder of our interdependence, isn't it? We can't just assume outside help will arrive instantly.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the sources really stress that building those relationships before a crisis hits is incredibly valuable. Just knowing your neighbors,
Yeah.
knowing who might need extra help, maybe an elderly person, someone with mobility issues, a family with very young children, or knowing who might have useful skills. Maybe someone has medical training or construction experience, and just figuring out basic ways to communicate with each other that can be literally life-saving.
So it's really about fostering a kind of local, immediate network.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be some huge formal thing. It can start really small.
Yeah.
Simple things like just introducing yourself if you haven't already, sharing contact information, maybe just phone numbers, looking out for each other's properties when people are away, maybe forming a basic neighborhood communication tree or a group chat.
Okay.
Some sources even suggest looking into organized community emergency response team training, CERT programs if they're available in your area.
It feels much more, I don't know, organic and supportive than just everyone stockpiling their own individual bunkers.
It absolutely is. It's about recognizing that collective action significantly strengthens individual preparedness. When you know your neighbors, you're not just looking out for number one. You're part of a group that can potentially pool resources, share accurate information, provide mutual support when all the official channels are completely disrupted.
Yeah.
The stories from past events consistently highlight how neighbor helping neighbor is often the very first and sometimes the most effective response on the ground.
That interconnection feels really, really important. This whole concept of preparedness is definitely expanding way beyond just, having a go bag by the door.
It really is. It's about building these layers of resilience. Your personal supplies and skills, yes, but also a prepared home environment, your own mental fortitude, and definitely those community connections.
Okay.
And building on that idea, protecting everything you care about. A really significant portion of the source material focused on an area that, frankly, gets frequently overlooked, preparing for the animals in our lives.
Ah, yes, the animal preparedness section. Those insights were incredibly detailed, weren't they?
They really were.
The sources highlighted just devastating examples from past events like the Paradise wildfires or Hurricane Katrina. Huge numbers of pets were lost or had to be left behind, and the profound regret owners felt afterward.
Oh, those stories are just heartbreaking. And they really underline this critical gap in planning, specifically for animals. Or think about the challenges with livestock during, say, the BC floods here in Canada, or the Texas freeze down south.
Right.
Or the incredible suddenness of something like the Lytton fire evacuation, where people barely had time to grab anything, let alone struggle with getting animals into carriers or trailers. These aren't just statistics. They're the real consequences of just, hoping for the best instead of having a concrete plan.
And the emotional toll on people who couldn't bring their animals or whose animals didn't survive, it's just immense. So, okay, how do we avoid that awful regret? How do we make sure our furry or feathered or herved family members are genuinely part of the plan?
Well, the fundamental principle is exactly the same as for humans. Dedicated emergency supplies. Step one is building specific go bags or emergency kits for each animal. Again, aiming for at least 72 hours of self-sufficiency for them.
Okay, so beyond just extra food and water, what actually goes into an animal kit?
Plenty. Definitely any medications they need, plus copies of their veterinary records. That's crucial.
Oh, good point. Copies.
Yeah, copies. And clear recent photos of each animal for identification purposes, just in case you get separated.
Yeah.
Leashes, harnesses, and importantly, carriers that are the right size and, crucially, easily accessible, not buried in the back of a closet.
Right.
And then familiar items like a favorite blanket or a sturdy toy. These can provide really needed comfort in a stressful situation.
Comfort items. Yeah, that makes sense. It's incredibly stressful for them, too.
Absolutely. And then think about species-specific needs. For cats, maybe a small portable litter box and scoop. For birds, things like Cuttlebone or Grit. For smaller animals like rabbits or guinea pigs, extra bedding and maybe a little hidey house or tube. Think about what they specifically need to feel secure and stay healthy. And for livestock, the list expands extra halters and leads, maybe portable feeders, collapsible water troughs.
Okay, so you've got the kit ready. The next absolute crucial piece seems to be the evacuation plan itself, right? The sources were super detailed on this.
They really pushed this idea of having almost like a physical treasure map for evacuation, not just knowing it vaguely in your head,
Right.
but actually mapping out primary and secondary escape routes from your specific home to a designated safe meeting point, including on the map. where you'll quickly gather the animals, where the vehicle or trailers usually park, maybe key landmarks along the routes.
And they recommended using visuals, didn't they? Like even photos or GPS coordinates, and having laminated copies posted where anyone helping maybe a neighbor could easily see them.
Exactly. And for livestock owners, obviously, the complexity increases dramatically.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You need to plan specific routes that are actually suitable for hauling a trailer. Knowing the travel time, considering that animals might be panicked and uncooperative, identifying potential hazards like low bridges or narrow, winding roads. One handbook even cheekily suggested practicing loading anxious animals ahead of time, maybe using treats.
Bribery is a valid emergency tactic, apparently.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've practiced loading, you have your map. Where are you actually going with all these animals?
That needs to be figured out well in advance, too. Researching animal-friendly hotels or motels outside your immediate potential disaster zone. Identifying friends or family further afield who might have space and willingness to take in your animals temporarily.
Okay.
Contacting local kennels, vet clinics, even fairgrounds to understand what their emergency sheltering policies are. Do they even have one? Don't assume.
And making those reciprocal agreements you mentioned earlier, right, with neighbors or fellow animal owners.
Yes. Building that network is such a vital backup plan. If you happen to be away from home when disaster strikes or an evacuation order comes,
Yeah.
who has permission and knows how to safely access your property and evacuate your animals for you, having those prearranged agreements, maybe exchanging keys, makes a world of difference.
Okay, so supplies, map, destinations, transport, backup helpers. What about sheltering in place, especially for farm animals if evacuation just isn't possible or advised for some reason?
Yeah, the sources had surprisingly specific criteria for what constitutes a safe sheltering location on your property. They weren't just saying, turn them loose in a big field.
Oh.
The ideal spot is actually a large, open pasture, ideally looking at about an acre per large animal, to prevent injuries from crowding if they panic. Critically, it should have no overhead power lines that could come down and no loose debris nearby that could become dangerous projectiles in high winds.
What about fencing?
Woven wire fencing is strongly preferred over barbed wire. Panicking animals can get severely injured running into or getting tangled in barbed wire.
Ouch. Yeah.
Also, obviously, access to high ground if flooding is a potential risk in your area. And a secure, reliable source of food and plenty of clean water are absolutely non-negotiable. If you have to shelter them indoors, say in a barn, that structure needs to be assessed and potentially reinforced beforehand. And everything stored inside needs to be secured so it doesn't fall or shift.
Wow. That's a level of detail I definitely wouldn't have just thought of off the top of my head. It really underscores that preparedness has to be specific to your situation, including the types and numbers of animals you care for.
Absolutely.
Okay, minute straight from the physical world and our animal companions to the digital realm. The sources also dedicated quite a bit of space to communication and, interestingly, digital preparedness.
Yes, because in our increasingly hyper-connected world, our heavy reliance on technology creates its own unique set of vulnerabilities in a crisis. What actually happens when the cell towers are down, the internet is out, maybe the power is gone for days?
I suppose I've mostly only thought about that in terms of, like, my phone battery dying and needing a charger.
Right, but the sources really push us to consider more widespread and potentially longer-lasting disruptions. A major earthquake, a massive hurricane, even a severe ice storm could knock out huge swaths of critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
Suddenly, your normal access to information, communication with loved ones, even access to essential online accounts, banking, insurance, whatever, it could all become impossible.
That sounds incredibly isolating and really challenging. So how do the sources recommend we oops-proof our digital lives against that kind of scenario?
A few key takeaways emerged. First, the basics of digital security. Making sure you have strong, unique passwords, using multi-factor authentication wherever you possibly can, maybe considering a reputable password manager. This just helps protect your critical accounts if your devices get lost, damaged, or even stolen during chaos.
Okay, that's a good fundamental step anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Next is redundant backups of your important digital files. Don't just rely on the copy on your computer's hard drive.
Right.
Use an external hard drive, maybe stored somewhere safe. And utilize cloud storage for your most critical stuff. Because if your home is damaged or inaccessible, that cloud backup might be your only way to retrieve vital documents, irreplaceable photos, important work files. One source even touched briefly on the value of encryption for sensitive communications, suggesting looking into apps or services that offer end-to-end encryption, especially if privacy might be a concern in a particularly volatile or uncertain situation.
Interesting. It's kind of like having multiple spare tires for your digital life then.
That's a great way to think about it. And here's where the low-tech approach makes a comeback again. The sources strongly advocate for keeping physical, paper copies of your most critical information.
Paper copies. It feels almost rebellious in 2024.
Doesn't it? But think about it. Paper doesn't need power. It doesn't need a Wi-Fi signal or a cell tower. If all your digital systems fail, that physical folder stored securely, maybe in your go bag or a fireproof safe, could be absolutely invaluable.
What kind of things should be in there?
Emergency contact lists, copies of insurance policies, maybe bank account numbers kept very securely, obviously, copies of photo IDs for everyone in the household, maybe even printed maps or directions to key locations like evacuation shelters or rendezvous points.
That's a really, really good point. It's a solid reminder not to put all our eggs in that digital basket, isn't it?
For sure.
And, okay, speaking of communication itself.
Yeah.
What happens when, as you said, cell towers are down or the power's out for an extended time? How do the sources suggest we actually stay in touch or even just get basic information?
Yeah, the inability to communicate causes immense anxiety. So the sources really emphasize planning specifically for communication breakdowns. This means having backup methods ready that don't rely on the electrical grid or normal cell service.
Like old school tech.
Precisely. Things like battery-powered or, even better, hand-crank radios for receiving official information, NOAA weather alerts, emergency broadcasts, official updates, maybe having a set of basic walkie-talkies for short-range communication within your immediate area, like with your family or close neighbors.
Okay.
And remember that whistle we mentioned for the emergency kit. Simplest signaling tool there is if you need help. Oh, and one piece made the extremely basic but so crucial point of having important phone numbers written down on paper.
Written down, like in a physical address book. I honestly don't think I know most people's actual numbers by heart anymore. My phone just knows.
Most of us don't. It feels totally archaic, right? But if your phone is dead or lost or the network is down, that simple piece of paper becomes a lifeline to contacting loved ones or essential services if you can find a working landline or borrow someone else's satellite phone, maybe.
Wow.
These sources consistently stress that simple, reliable, low-tech solutions are absolutely essential. Plan Bs, Plan Cs, Plan Ds.
So it really is about redundancy, having multiple ways to try and communicate and multiple ways to try and receive information.
Exactly right. And just as important is establishing clear communication protocols with your own household beforehand.
What do you mean by protocols?
Like, where will you try to meet up if you get separated during an evacuation and can't reach each other? Do you have a designated spot? Is there an out-of-town contact person, a friend or relative in a different region that everyone in the family agrees to try and check in with if local phone lines are jammed? Because often, long-distance calls might go through when local ones won't.
Ah, the out-of-town contact, yeah.
Making those decisions now, calmly, reduces so much potential chaos and panic later.
Having those tough conversations before the stress actually hits seems crucial. It gives everyone a clear playbook to follow.
It's basically a communication roadmap for when the usual routes are closed. And staying informed, it goes beyond just tuning into official alerts. The sources also noted that in many crisis situations, word of mouth and neighbors sharing information directly can be incredibly fast, sometimes even more reliable in the initial stages, which connects right back to that community preparedness piece. Knowing your neighbors means you might hear crucial ground-level updates from them well before official channels manage to broadcast them widely.
It really does all tie together, doesn't it? Okay, wow. We have covered so much ground, from staying safe during the actual shaking to supplies, home prep, mental resilience, community connections, digital life, our animals. What about that final piece of the puzzle? The actual act of evacuation itself.
Yes, if authorities issue an official evacuation order, or if your home is clearly unsafe to remain in, being ready to leave quickly and efficiently is vital. This is where having that go bag packed and ready for each person becomes absolutely key.
The classic go bag. Okay, remind us, what are the absolute essentials for that?
Think minimum requirements to get you through maybe 24 to 72 hours away from home, potentially in a shelter or someone else's house. The sources consistently recommend a change of clothes suitable for the weather, essential medications, at least a few days worth, copies of those important documents we talked about.
Right, the paper copies.
Yep. A basic personal first aid kit, some high-energy, non-perishable snacks, refillable water bottles, a flashlight with extra batteries, and of course,
Don't say it, cat.
can't forget the cash now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And maybe like a portable phone charger or a power bank these days.
Oh, definitely good additions if you have them. It's essentially a condensed, lightweight version of your larger home emergency kit, designed to be grabbed instantly on your way out the door.
Okay.
One Piece also made a really thoughtful suggestion. Include something small for comfort or distraction. Maybe a paperback book, a deck of cards, a small puzzle book or game, especially if you have kids. Because you might end up spending a lot of time waiting in a shelter or an evacuation center.
That's a small detail, but it feels significant. Preparedness isn't just about bare physical survival. It's also about maintaining morale, managing stress, keeping your mental well-being intact through a tough time.
Absolutely. Having a simple way to occupy your mind or maybe connect with others through a simple game, it helps immensely in a high-stress situation. It's absolutely part of that overall resilience we've been talking about.
You know, wrapping this all up, the biggest takeaway for me, just reflecting on this whole deep dive and all these different sources, is that preparedness. It really isn't about succumbing to fear. It's not about trying to build some impenetrable fortress against every possible bad thing that could ever happen.
I couldn't agree more. It's fundamentally a proactive stance, isn't it? It's acknowledging realistically that life is unpredictable. And instead of feeling helpless about that uncertainty, it's about equipping yourself with knowledge, with practical skills, with those crucial support systems so you can navigate those uncertainties when they arise. It's fundamentally a shift from feeling powerless to feeling empowered.
That really is the oops-proofing mindset, isn't it? It's about approaching the potential for challenges not with dread, but with knowledge, with resourcefulness, and yeah, maybe even with a little bit of dark humor sometimes to get through it.
And the sources repeatedly stress this point. It doesn't require extreme measures. You don't need a massive budget to get started. You don't have to do everything all at once. It's truly about taking small, manageable steps, focusing on progress, not demanding perfection from yourself.
Right.
Celebrating securing that one wobbly bookshelf, or finally packing that basic go bag, or even just having that difficult but necessary conversation with your family about a meeting place. Those are all significant wins on the path to being more prepared.
And we've definitely pulled a tremendous amount of really valuable, actionable information from the stack of sources today, particularly highlighting the practical step-by-step guidance found in resources like Tina Jin's handbooks. They really do sound like accessible toolboxes for building your own personalized plan.
They really do offer concrete steps, which makes the whole thing feel less daunting, much more achievable for anyone.
So as we finish up this deep dive, I guess I want to leave you, our listener, with this thought, building on everything we've discussed. Can you consider just one single, small, concrete step that you can realistically take, maybe today, maybe this week, that will make you feel just that little bit more prepared?
Yeah.
Don't put it off indefinitely until that potential uh-oh moment actually arrives. What's one small thing?
It really could be anything. Securing one heavy picture frame. Buying one extra case of water the next time you're at the store. Writing down literally 3 key phone numbers on a piece of paper and putting it in your wallet. Even just spending 10 minutes online researching one potentially animal-friendly hotel outside your immediate area.
Yeah.
Truly, one small step is so much better than none.
Start somewhere and encourage yourself, encourage those around you to keep learning, keep preparing incrementally, and keep these important conversations going. Because you are absolutely not alone in this journey. In a very real sense, we are all navigating these uncertainties together.
And remember that true preparedness, as we saw so clearly threaded through the sources, covers everyone in your care. And that absolutely includes those who depend entirely on you, like your animals. Planning for them isn't separate. It is planning for the whole family. It reinforces that fundamental idea of community, of looking out for each other.
Take that thought with you. Until our next deep dive, stay curious, stay connected, and maybe keep oops-proofing your world one small step at a time.
That's a wrap for today's chaos. If you learned something, laughed a little, or now feel slightly more prepared for life's curveballs, we've done our job. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel and follow us on social media. Catch us on Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere podcasts make you rethink your to-do list. Thanks for tuning in. And remember, if it's important and unexpected, we probably cover it. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.